Hello everyone, I'm Teacher KK and I will be your guide through this exciting journey of learning chess. Each video will last about 10 minutes and will cover things related to chess, like tactics, strategies, and history of chess. Whether you're looking to expand your knowledge, exploring new interests, or simply looking for something to soothe you from your overstressed subjects, this series is for you. Are you ready? Let's go! Okay, let's start off by learning the board. In a classical chess game, the board is an 8x8 checker squares with A, B, C, D, E, F, G labeled on the horizontal lines and 1 to 8 labeled in the vertical lines. When you are playing white or playing black, the left down square should be black. And if you're white, the left down square should be labeled A1, and if you're black, the left down square should be H8. And so how do we win the game of chess? We simply win by capturing the king of the opponent pieces. If you're playing white, you simply capture the black king, and if you're playing black, you capture the white king to win. If both sides fail to capture the kings, then it's simply a draw. Okay, let's move on to how the pieces move. So, you have a game that your goal is to capture the opponent's king. How would you design the other pieces' movement ways? Well, it's pretty simple. The methods that pop up in your mind should be letting the pieces move vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. Good job, you have invented at least 3 ways that the chess pieces are designed. The rook is designed to move horizontally and vertically only, without any constraints if there are no pieces in the way. The bishop is designed to move diagonally only, with no constraints if there are no pieces in the way too. And the queen is designed to move both horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. It's just like the sum of the rook and the bishop. So these are how these 3 pieces move. How do we remember that they move in this way? Well, this is how I do it. The rook shape is kind of squared, right? So it should move in straight lines vertically and horizontally. The bishop, it has a crevice in his shape, so it moves in diagonally. And the queen, it is the most fanciest shape, so it naturally moves in all directions and is the most flexible and powerful piece. So these are the 3 pieces. And how does the king move? The king is basically just like the queen. It can move in all directions, but only 1 square at each time. There's a special way of moving the king called castle, which also moves the rook at the same time, but we will discuss it later on. Next, I will talk about how the pawn is moved. The pawn can only move in 1 square in front of it. It is the relatively considered the weakest piece in chess, but sometimes it can hold strong power. The way of the pawn captures is a little different from other pieces. The pawn can only capture 1 square diagonally in front of it, so the pawn can capture these 2 pawns. However, the pawn cannot capture the queen in front of it, which is usually what the pawn moves if there is no queen in front of it. Usually, for the other pieces, they capture just by moving on top of the pieces. So this is how the pawn moves. Alright, there is one more law of the pawn and two more laws of the pawn, which is if the pawn is at its original place, it can choose to move one square or two square at a time. And whenever it is moved, it loses its choice and it can only choose to advance one square at a time. And whenever the pawn advances to the last horizontal line of the opponents, it cannot move anymore, right? We can see that there's no square in front of it. Therefore, the pawn can be promoted, which means that it can be chosen to changed into any other piece that you would like. The bishop, knight, rook, or the queen. Of course, we can't change it into a king because you can't have two leaders in the same game, right? Usually, we would choose the queen, but occasionally we choose the knight and rook and bishop. There's another special way of the pawn's movement called the en passant, which I will not introduce in this course yet. And lastly, we have the pieces. We have the piece, the knight. The knight has the most complicated way of moving. If the white knight is in here, it can move to these 8 squares respectively. How should we remember them? Well, different teachers teach in different way, and I will teach some methods of remembering it. One way is by drawing the L. We can draw an L from the knight like this, and we get one of the squares that it can go to. We can also mirror the L and going like here. Similarly, the L can go to the right, and the L can draw down or up. And the L can basically go in any direction to these 8 squares that the knight can go. Or another way of remembering it is like a circle. By connecting all the squares that the knight can go, we can basically draw a circle. But it is kind of hard to remember like this. I prefer the way of remembering it as an L. The knight also has a special moving law, that is, it can jump over pieces. For example, if there are 3 rooks over here, the knight can still go to these 2 squares. However, if it was other pieces cannot do so. For example, this rook over here, it cannot jump over the first rook and capture the other rook. It can only capture the first rook and then capture the second one. So this is how the knight moves, and we have basically learned all of the ways the pieces are moved. And as I was talking, I have already set up how the pieces are put when we are originally starting the game. The blank pieces are put in a mirror, so it is pretty fair for both players. So, quick revision of how the pieces we learned this class moves. You can pause this video at any time and try to answer. First, the queen. The queen is the most powerful and fancy piece. It can move in all directions, vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. Next, the rook. The rook is quite squared as its shape, so it can move horizontally and vertically without any constraints. Next, the bishop. The bishop can move diagonally because it has a crevice in its shape. That's the bishop. Next, the king. The king is similarly like the queen. It can move in all directions, but only for one square at a time. Next is the pawn. The pawn can choose to move one square or two squares forward when it is at its original place and can only capture one square diagonally in front of it. It cannot capture its piece directly in front of it. And whenever the pawn advances to the last line of the opponent, it can promote to any piece other than the pawn itself and the king. Finally, we have the knight. The knight moves in an L shape. L shape to all 8 squares, and it can jump over pieces in its way. There, I hope you have remembered how all of the pieces move. Thank you very much for listening to today's class. Next class, I will introduce the special ways of moving the pawn, which is called en passant, and the special way of moving the king and rook, which is called castling.